The sound that started the war wasn't a gunshot or a scream. It was a pathetic thwump. It was the sound of a thick, commercial-grade, bright orange fiber optic cable, the kind that carries gigabits of data per second, being unceremoniously snipped in two by a pair of heavy-duty wire cutters. The two severed ends fell into the freshly cut grass of my new lawn, looking as sad and useless as a politician's promise. The woman holding the wire cutters, a grim expression of righteous fury on her face, was my new neighbor. Well, not my direct neighbor, but something far more insidious. She was Brenda, president of the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association. "There," she announced, her voice filled with the triumphant finality of an emperor salting the earth of a conquered city. She holstered the cutters on a special-made leather loop on her belt, next to a sheathed measuring tape. Bylaw 7, Section C, Paragraph 4. No unapproved wiring, cabling, or conduits shall be visible on any residential or common area property. Consider this your official notice. I just stared. My brain, a machine usually occupied with optimizing network traffic flow and debugging faulty code, was experiencing what tech support would call a catastrophic failure. I blinked, hoping the world would render correctly on a second attempt. It didn't. Brenda was still there, standing over the corpse of a cable that, until 30 seconds ago, I had vaguely admired for its professional installation. "Brenda," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "That wire was here when I moved in 3 weeks ago. It runs from that telephone pole." I pointed to the pole on the street. "Across the very corner of my property and into that facility." I pointed to the 10-foot-tall fence topped with barbed wire, not 50 feet away. A small, unassuming sign on the fence read, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Coast Guard Station, Port Roberts. "I don't care if it's a direct line to Santa Claus," she sniffed, pulling out her clipboard and making a check mark with a pen she clicked authoritatively. "It's orange. Orange is not on the approved Oak Haven Estates color palette. It's an eyesore, and it's gone." Before I could formulate a response that adequately conveyed the sheer, weapons-grade stupidity of her actions, a sound cut through the tranquil suburban air. It was an alarm, a loud, piercing, insistent beep, beep, beep that came directly from the Coast Guard station. A moment later, a large red light on top of their main communications tower began to flash, painting the side of Brenda's beige golf cart, which I now noticed had "The Justice Mobile" stenciled on the side, in apocalyptic pulses. Brenda looked at the flashing light, then back at me, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her features for the first time. "Well," she said, her voice a little less certain. "They should have submitted an architectural request form." I didn't say a word. I just looked at her, then at the dead cable, then at the flashing red light. The entire reason I'd moved here, the entire foundation of my carefully constructed life, was for peace. I am, for lack of a better term, a digital monk. My name is Alex. I'm 32 years old, and I'm a freelance network architect. I build and maintain the digital backbones of companies that pay me obscene amounts of money to ensure their data flows as smoothly as water. It's a job that requires immense focus, and most importantly, a rock-solid, high-speed internet connection. For 10 years, I'd lived in a shoebox apartment in the city, enduring the sirens, the upstairs neighbors who practiced tap dancing at 3 a.m., and the perpetually unreliable cable company. I saved every penny to buy this house in Oak Haven Estates. It was my sanctuary, my monastery. It had a dedicated office I could soundproof, a garage for my modest car, and most critically, it was one of the few suburban neighborhoods with a direct fiber-to-the-home hookup. I'd spent my first week here not unpacking boxes, but running Cat6 Ethernet cables through the walls and setting up my masterpiece, a floor-to-ceiling server rack in the office, humming with quiet efficiency. It was my digital Sistine Chapel. I had achieved my life's goal, a fortress of solitude with a gigabit symmetrical connection. And this woman, this self-appointed czar of taupe and turf, had just taken a pair of $50 wire cutters to the very thing that made it all possible. Except, as the blaring alarm from the federal facility suggested, she'd cut something far more important than my connection. My anger, a cold, quiet thing, was quickly being superseded by another instinct, the urge to fix it. It's what I do. I see a broken network, and I make it whole. Brenda was now trying to write me a citation for improperly disposed of communication hardware, pointing at the cable she herself had just destroyed. I turned my back on her and walked, not ran, into my garage. The alarm was giving me a headache. People have hobbies. Some people collect stamps. Others restore old cars. My hobby is redundancy. My entire career is built on the concept of what if? What if a server fails? You have a backup. What if a power grid goes down? You have a UPS and a generator. What if the local fiber line gets cut by an HOA president with an IQ lower than the ambient temperature? Well, I had a plan for that, too. In the corner of my garage, under a dusty tarp, was a large black Pelican case. I flipped the latches and opened it. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was my Apocalypse Kit, a high-performance auto-aligning satellite internet terminal. Think Starlink, but on steroids. It was designed for deployment in disaster zones or on research vessels in the middle of the ocean. I'd bought it for a contract job in Alaska that fell through, and I couldn't bring myself to sell it. Brenda was yelling something about fines from the driveway. I ignored her. I grabbed the dish, a tripod stand, a pre-configured weatherproof access point, and a 50-foot heavy-duty extension cord. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked as I walked briskly to the side of my house. "Unapproved construction is a Level 3 violation." I didn't have time to explain the beautiful, intricate dance of satellite handshakes and ground station relays. I threw the tripod legs open, mounted the dish, and placed it on the lawn where it had a clear, unobstructed view of the northern sky. I ran the extension cord to an outdoor outlet and plugged it in. The dish whirred to life with a gentle hum, its internal motors tilting it slowly, hunting for its orbital partners hundreds of miles above. Then I sprinted. Up the stairs to my office, the single cable from the dish in my hand. I plugged it into the satellite modem, which I then jacked into a specifically designated WAN 2 port on my enterprise-grade router. My fingers flew across the keyboard. A few lines of code, a quick execution of a script I'd written years ago for just such a contingency. The script detected the failure of the primary fiber line, W1-1, and seamlessly rerouted all network traffic through the newly active satellite link, W1-2. I watched the network topography map on my main monitor. The red line indicating the severed connection blinked out. A new blue line, labeled Starcom Backup, glowed green. Active, stable, and from outside, silence. The alarm at the Coast Guard station had stopped. The flashing red light went dark. The entire process, from Brenda's triumphant snip to my silent satellite-powered fix, had taken 2 minutes and 12 seconds. I walked to my office window and looked down. Brenda was standing on my lawn, her clipboard lowered, a look of profound confusion on her face. She looked at the silent station, then at the small, futuristic-looking dish on my lawn, then back at the station. The hamster on the wheel in her brain had clearly just fallen off and was having a little lie-down. My phone rang. The caller ID was blocked. I had a pretty good idea who it was. I hit the speaker button. "This is Chief Warrant Officer Miller at Coast Guard Station Port Roberts," a man's voice said. It was tight, strained, and vibrating with controlled stress. "Who is this?" Alex," I said, my eyes still locked on Brenda. "Your neighbor, the one with the Recently decommissioned fiber line. There was a pause on the other end. I could hear the faint sound of other voices, urgent and professional, in the background. My entire station, Chief Miller said slowly, each word carved from granite. My operations center, my radar, my dispatch, everything went completely dark for 2 minutes and 12 seconds. We are in the middle of a search and rescue operation for a fishing vessel with 3 souls on board that went missing in the squall last night. Then, everything came back online, but my network diagnostics say our primary government fiber link is down, and we are, for some reason, routing all secure traffic through a civilian satellite service registered to an Alex Petrov. I'm going to need you to tell me what the hell is going on, right now. I took a deep, calming breath, a strange sense of exhilaration starting to bubble up through my anger. I looked out the window at Brenda, who was now cautiously approaching the satellite dish as if it might bite her. "Chief," I said, a slow grin spreading across my face, "you are not going to believe this." 30 minutes later, my front yard looked like the staging area for a very petty, very confusing episode of Cops. A police cruiser was parked at the curb, its light bar mercifully dark. 2 officers stood near the hood, listening with expressions of deepening existential despair as Brenda, her voice now a high-pitched whine of victimhood, explained her side of the story. I recognized the archetypes immediately. The first was Officer Rodriguez, a man in his late 50s with a magnificent mustache and eyes that had seen every form of human folly and were thoroughly unimpressed. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth, including a dental appointment. His partner was Officer Chen, young, sharp, by the book, with a notepad out and a pen poised. He was actually listening. A rookie mistake. And then he installed this thing, Brenda was saying, gesturing wildly at my satellite dish, which was humming along contentedly. It's clearly some sort of illegal federal spy equipment. He's probably listening to our phone calls. It's a gross violation of Oak Haven privacy standards and, I'm sure, several state and federal laws. I decided it was time to intervene before she accused me of using the dish to control the weather. I walked out my front door, holding a mug of coffee. "Good morning, officers," I said calmly. Officer Rodriguez turned his weary gaze on me. "Sir, are you Alex Petrov?" "I am." "This lady here says you're running an illegal spy operation on your lawn." I took a sip of my coffee. "Well, this lady here," I said, nodding at Brenda, "is the reason the Coast Guard station next door temporarily fell off the face of the earth. She cut their primary communications line with wire cutters." Chen looked up from his notepad, blinking. She cut it?" "With those?" I said, pointing to the menacing tool still holstered on Brenda's belt. She instinctively put a hand over it, like a gunslinger protecting his 6-shooter. Rodriguez sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 similar suburban squabbles. He turned to Brenda. "Ma'am, let me get this straight. You saw a wire, you decided you didn't like it, and so you cut it? A wire running to a federal facility?" "It was an unapproved cable," she insisted. "He's the one who broke the rules first. He's creating a nuisance. And now he has this satellite dish. It's not in the bylaws." Before I could point out that my lawn was not, in fact, governed by her ridiculous bylaws, my phone rang again. I glanced at the screen. CWO Miller. I held up a finger to the officers. "Excuse me a moment, it's the government," I answered, putting it on speakerphone. "Alex here." "Alex, Chief Miller again," the voice said, still stressed but a little less frantic. "Just giving you a heads up. I've dispatched a federal communications maintenance team to assess the damage to our line. ETA is about an hour. They'll need access to your property. Also, our legal department is drafting a formal cease and desist letter to your homeowners association. And finally, just so you're aware, the county sheriff's department and the FBI's infrastructure division have been notified of the communications disruption, so this should be fun. The silence that followed was exquisite. Officer Chen's pen was frozen mid-scribble. Officer Rodriguez's magnificent mustache seemed to twitch with something that looked suspiciously like amusement. He slowly turned his head to look at Brenda, who had gone pale. "The FBI?" she squeaked. Rodriguez cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said, his tone shifting from bored to officially interested. "Willfully damaging property belonging to the United States government is a federal felony. I'm just a local cop, but that sounds serious. Interfering with Coast Guard operations, especially during an active search and rescue mission." He let the sentence hang in the air. "That sounds like a whole other level of stupid. I mean, alleged stupid," he corrected himself, giving me a quick, almost imperceptible nod. He turned to me. "Sir, I'd recommend you document everything. Take pictures. Write down what happened. It sounds to me like you've got it handled." He tipped his hat. "Have a nice day." He and Chen got back in their cruiser. As they pulled away, I saw Rodriguez say something to his partner, who then burst out laughing. Brenda was sputtering, her face a kaleidoscope of outrage, fear, and confusion. Her authority, the only thing that gave her life meaning, had been publicly and comprehensively dismantled. She stared at me, then at the dish, then at the silent Coast Guard station. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Without another word, she scurried back to the Justice Mobile, fired it up, and sped away, leaving a trail of crushed dignity in her wake. I stood on my lawn, sipping my coffee. The sun was shining, birds were chirping. For the first time in an hour, there was peace. It lasted until the next morning. I should have known it wouldn't be that simple. Tyrants don't relinquish power gracefully. When their primary weapon fails, they don't surrender. They just find a smaller, sharper knife. Brenda's wire cutters had been confiscated by the federal maintenance crew, who treated me like a visiting dignitary and gifted me a USCG baseball cap. And the threat of the FBI had seemingly scared her off the topic of federal infrastructure. So she fell back to what she knew best, the book. The next morning, my front door looked like it had been ticketed by a meter maid with OCD and a vendetta. No fewer than 10 crisply printed violation notices were taped to the wood, arranged in a neat, overlapping pattern. I peeled them off one by one, my initial amusement slowly turning into a kind of awe at the sheer, weaponized pettiness of it all. Violation #1. Bylaw 14A. Unapproved structure. For the satellite dish. Fine. $100 per day. Violation #2. Bylaw 21. Landscaping neglect. For the 2 small patches of dead grass where the severed ends of the fiber cable had lain for an hour before the feds cleaned it up. Fine. $50. Violation #3. Bylaw 9C. Improper illumination. The color temperature of my front porch light was apparently 3,500 K, a cool white, when the bylaws clearly specified a warm white between 2,700 K and 3,000 K. Fine, $25. Violation #4. Bylaw 18B. Waste receptacle visibility. My trash and recycling bins had been visible from the street for approximately 7 minutes, longer than the approved post-pickup grace period. Fine, $30. Violation #5, Bylaw 2B. Unapproved doorbell. Finish. My Ring doorbell had a satin nickel faceplate. The approved finishes were bronze or black. Fine, $25. And so on. My welcome mat was non-compliant. My house numbers were the wrong font. My garden hose was not coiled in a neat and concentric fashion. It was a masterpiece, a symphony of spite. She couldn't get me for saving a federal search and rescue operation, so she was going to bury me under a mountain of paper cuts. She was going to fine me into submission over the color of my doorbell. I laid the violations out on my kitchen table and stared at them. Part of me wanted to lawyer up. Another part wanted to move. But as I looked at the sheer obsessive detail, a third part of me, the part that sees a complex problem and feels an irresistible urge to solve it, took over. This wasn't a legal battle. It was a systems engineering problem. The system was the HOA. The code was its 300-page book of covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC and Rs. Brenda was just a bug in the user interface, and I was the best damn debugger she would ever meet. "Fine," I said to the empty room. "She wants to play by the book? Let's read the book." I went to my office, logged into the Oak Haven Estates community portal, and downloaded the PDF of the CC and Rs. I poured myself a large glass of scotch, the very nice bottle Chief Miller had dropped off as a thank you, and settled in for a long night. I didn't skim. I read every single word. I treated it like hostile code I'd been hired to crack. I searched for loopholes, for ambiguities, for poorly worded phrases and contradictory clauses. I cross-referenced sections, I made notes, I built a spreadsheet. And oh, the things I found. The bylaws were a treasure trove of unintended consequences, written by committees of amateurs trying to sound like lawyers. They were specific in all the wrong places and vague in all the right ones. For example, Bylaw 14. A forbade unapproved structures, which she'd used against my satellite dish. But Bylaw 12, Appendix B, had a whole section on permitted attachments. It specifically allowed for the installation of flagpoles, antennas for personal communication or reception, and certain decorative items, provided they met height and material requirements. My dish was an antenna for personal reception. Check. The bylaws forbade lawn gnomes by name, but they said nothing about any other kind of lawn ornament. An interesting omission. They specified the exact approved paint colors for houses, but the list included a shade called aggressive beige. The name alone was a cry for help. By 4 a.m., bleary-eyed but filled with a terrible, righteous purpose, I had my plan. It wasn't a plan to fight the violations. It was a plan to comply. A plan of such aggressive, malicious, and yet technically unimpeachable compliance that it would make Brenda's head spin. She wanted to use the rule book as a weapon. I was about to show her that I could build a nuclear arsenal from its pages. I cracked my knuckles, opened a new project folder on my computer, and named it Operation Petty Triumphs. My first call the next morning was to a local company I found online with stellar reviews and a refreshingly old-school name, Gus & Sons Handiwork. A young, cheerful voice answered. "Gus & Sons? This is Leo. How can we help you?" "Leo, my name is Alex. I have a series of small, somewhat unusual home improvement projects. I'm looking for a contractor who appreciates creative interpretation." There was a pause. "My dad handles the creative stuff. He calls it crap." "I handle the billing. What did you have in mind?" I took a deep breath. "First, I need a flagpole. According to my HOA bylaws, I can have one, up to a maximum height of 25 feet. I want it exactly 25 feet tall, installed 10 feet from my front door." "Okay, a flagpole. We can do that," Leo said. "Excellent. I also need to mount something to the top of it. A small antenna." "What kind of antenna?" "A high-gain Wi-Fi repeater." A muffled voice in the background grunted. "A what? On a flagpole? Tell him no?" "That's my dad, Gus," Leo said, his voice laced with amusement. "He says no." "Please inform Gus that HOA Bylaw 12B specifically allows for antennas for personal reception to be mounted on approved structures. A flagpole is an approved structure. Therefore, the antenna is compliant. I could hear Leo relaying this information. There was more grumbling. "He wants to know why you'd do that," Leo said. "Because I can," I replied. "Next, my house needs repainting. I've been cited for my doorbell color, so I figure I'll just do the whole house while I'm at it. The approved palette includes a color called aggressive beige." "Oh God, that one," Leo groaned. "It looks like sad, wet cardboard." "Perfect," I said. "I want the most aggressive beige you can mix. I want it to suck the joy out of the very air around it." "You got it," Leo chuckled. "What else is on this list of suburban vengeance?" "The list is long and glorious," I said. "I need a full quote for the flagpole, the paint job, the installation of 200 pink plastic flamingos, and the mounting of a set of 8-foot-tall, custom-tuned wind chimes." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. I heard Leo trying and failing to suppress a full-blown laugh. Gus's voice came through, clear as a bell. "Is this guy screwing with you?" "No, sir," I said respectfully. "I am not. I am a man who has been pushed too far by his HOA president, and I am prepared to pay generously for meticulous, high-quality, and completely by-the-book spite." Leo came back on the line, gasping for air. "Okay, Alex, okay, we're in. My dad loves suing HOAs, but this is way cheaper and funnier. We'll be there tomorrow morning to do a site survey. This is going to be the best job of our entire lives." Gus and Leo arrived the next day in a work truck that had seen better decades. Gus was a short, barrel-chested man with hands like cinder blocks and a permanent scowl. Leo was tall, lean, and had a grin that never seemed to leave his face. I walked them through the plan. With every item on my list, Gus's scowl deepened, while Leo's grin widened. 200 flamingos? Gus grunted, looking at my pristine lawn. "It'll look like a plastic bird apocalypse." "The bylaws forbid gnomes, Gus. Gnomes, specifically. Not flamingos," I said, showing him the printout. "And these wind chimes," Leo said, looking at the schematics I'd printed. "You really want them tuned to a C minor diminished 7th chord?" "It's the most discordant, unsettling chord in Western music," I explained happily. "But the chimes themselves, being under the daytime decibel limit, are perfectly legal decorative attachments." Gus stared at me for a long time. Then a sour-cracking smile spread across his weathered face. "I like you, kid," he said. "You're a psycho, but you do your homework." Operation Petty Triumphs began the following Monday. The first to go up was the flagpole. Gus and Leo's team dug a massive hole, filled it with an absurd amount of concrete, and erected a gleaming 25-foot aluminum pole that towered over my one-story house. It was majestic. It was ridiculous. Brenda stood on her own lawn across the street, watching the whole process, her arms crossed, a look of pure hatred on her face. The moment they finished, I scurried up a ladder and mounted my Wi-Fi repeater at the very top. An hour later, a new, open wireless network appeared for anyone in range. Brenda_sucks_free_Wi-Fi. The signal was glorious. Next came the painters. For 2 days, my house was swarmed. They stripped away the pleasant, muted gray and replaced it with the soul-crushing oppression of aggressive beige. It was worse than I could have ever imagined. It was the color of bureaucracy, of waiting rooms, of despair. When the sun hit it, it didn't reflect so much as absorb light and happiness from its surroundings. Then, the flamingos arrived. A massive truck pulled up and unloaded box after box. Leo and I spent an entire afternoon unwrapping and staking 200 pink plastic birds into my front lawn. We didn't just place them randomly. We created a dynamic, flowing river of pink, swirling around my mailbox, cresting over the flower beds, and pooling near the sidewalk. It was a tacky, plastic masterpiece. Neighbors slowed their cars to stare, some in horror, some in open admiration. The pièce de résistance was the wind chimes. Gus had a metalworker friend craft them to my exact specifications. They were enormous, 8-foot-long aluminum tubes that looked like the exhaust pipes from a giant's motorcycle. He hung them from a sturdy oak tree in my backyard. The first time a breeze kicked up, the sound echoed through the neighborhood, a deep, resonant, and deeply unsettling clang-clong-clang that sounded like a robot falling down a metal staircase. With each new addition, a new violation notice would appear on my door. And with each one, I would send a polite, registered letter back to the HOA board, citing the exact bylaw and paragraph that made my actions 100% compliant, with copies of the relevant pages attached. Brenda was powerless. She had built the prison, and I was just decorating my cell with things she couldn't forbid. The neighborhood was buzzing. I was becoming a local folk hero, the guy who was fighting the HOA and somehow winning. But the final act of the drama was yet to come. And it wouldn't be delivered by a contractor, but by the United States government itself. A week after the installation of the Great Wall of Flamingos, I got a call from Chief Miller. "Alex," he said, his voice warm and amused. "I need to swing by. Is that okay?" "Of course, Chief. Everything all right?" "Everything's fantastic. I'm just playing the role of delivery boy. See you in 20?" Chief Miller arrived not in a government vehicle, but in his personal pickup truck. He was wearing jeans and a polo shirt, looking more like a friendly neighbor than the commander of a federal station. He was holding a large, official-looking envelope. "Brought you something," he said, handing it to me as I welcomed him in. "It's a copy of the final invoice we sent to your HOA for the emergency repairs and cable replacement. Figured you'd get a kick out of the line items." I opened it and scanned the bill. "Emergency Network Technician Dispatch. Fee $2,500. Armored fiber optic cable, 200 feet, $1,800. Hazard pay for hostile civilian environment, $500. My eyebrows shot up at that last one. "Yeah, the tech crew insisted on that after their conversation with Brenda," Miller chuckled. "They said they'd rather work in a hurricane." "I can't thank you enough for everything, Chief. Especially for that call when the cops were here." "Are you kidding? We thank you. You're a legend down at the station. Petty Officer Davis, our comms guy, has a picture of your satellite dish taped to his monitor like it's a pinup girl. He wants the full specs on your rig." We sat in my living room, and I poured him a glass of the scotch he'd brought me earlier. He looked out the window at the beige house, the towering flagpole, and the sea of pink birds. "So," he said, a grin spreading across his face, "this is your counteroffensive, I take it?" "Malicious compliance," I said proudly. "Every single thing out there is by the book." "Her book." He shook his head, laughing. "I've been in the service for 25 years. I've dealt with smugglers, hurricanes, and international incidents. I have never seen anything as effective or as hilarious as what you're doing. But I'm actually here to give you an update on the permanent solution." He leaned forward, his expression turning more serious. "Our lawyer sent the HOA the bill and a formal demand for guaranteed, permanent access to the utility easement to prevent this from ever happening again. Your HOA president and I have this from the mailman, who is a cousin of one of my petty officers, apparently saw the Department of Homeland Security letterhead, screamed, and threw the letter at him." I blinked. She threw federal mail at a mail carrier? "So the story goes. As a result, the HOA has been deemed uncooperative. And when a civilian organization is uncooperative in a matter of national security infrastructure..." He paused for dramatic effect. "We get to play hardball." "How hard?" I asked, leaning in. "The easement for that cable, which runs right along the edge of your property, cuts directly across 10 feet of the Oak Haven Estate's common area green space. That's that pristine patch of lawn over there that they mow with nail scissors and worship like a sacred relic. I knew the one. Brenda was out there every weekend, measuring the grass height." Well, Miller continued, a predatory gleam in his eye, since they won't cooperate on a simple access agreement, federal regulations allow us to take all necessary measures to secure our infrastructure. So, next week, a crew from the Army Corps of Engineers is coming out. They're going to dig a 3-foot wide, 4-foot deep trench right through that green space. They're going to lay a new, armored conduit in a thick bed of reinforced concrete. And then they're going to put up little federal property marker posts every 10 feet. It will be permanent. It will be ugly. And there is not a damn thing Brenda or the HOA can do to stop it. I sat back, stunned. It was more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. A permanent, concrete scar across Brenda's perfect kingdom. A monument to her stupidity. "Chief," I said, raising my glass, "you've made me the happiest man in Oak Haven Estates." He clinked his glass against mine. "The pleasure is all ours, Alex, all ours." News of the impending federal trench digging spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. It was the final straw for Brenda. Her power was slipping, her authority was a joke, and her sacred green space was about to be violated by the U.S. military. She did the only thing a cornered tyrant can do. She called a meeting. An email went out to all residents. "Emergency HOA meeting," the subject line screamed in all caps. The agenda was simple. 1. To vote on levying a series of massive, special fines against me for my campaign of targeted harassment and aesthetic terrorism. 2. To vote on a proposal to formally deny the U.S. government's plan to militarize our common area. It was a declaration of war. She was going to try and rally the neighborhood, turn them against me, and use their collective power to fight the federal government. It was, even for her, a breathtakingly bold and stupid plan. I knew this was the endgame. The meeting was held in the Oak Haven Community Center, a drab, beige room that perfectly matched my house. The air was thick with tension and the smell of stale coffee. Most of the homeowners were there, a mix of curious, annoyed, and concerned faces. Brenda stood at a flimsy podium at the front, looking severe and important. She had a stack of papers and a gavel. I took a seat in the back row. I hadn't come alone. In the row behind me sat Gus and Leo, my loyal contractors, whom I'd invited as expert witnesses. And a few seats away, looking calm and distinguished in his full dress uniform, was Chief Warrant Officer Miller. He'd insisted on coming as an observer. Brenda banged the gavel. "This emergency meeting of the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association is now in session." She launched into her speech. It was a masterpiece of melodrama and misdirection. She painted herself as the noble guardian of community standards, the lone warrior protecting their property values from a rogue outsider. "This man," she said, pointing a trembling finger at me, "has waged a war against everything we hold dear. He has mocked our rules, flaunted his contempt for our community, and turned our beautiful neighborhood into a laughingstock." She held up poster-sized photos she'd had printed at Walgreens. One of the flamingo flock, one of the towering flagpole, one of my aggressively beige house. "Is this what we want Oak Haven to become?" she cried, her voice quivering with manufactured outrage. "A tacky, noisy, garish wasteland? He claims he is following the rules, but he is violating the spirit of the rules. He must be stopped. I propose we levy a fine of $5,000 for his flagrant disregard for our community's aesthetic integrity." A murmur went through the crowd. $5,000 was a lot of money. "Furthermore," she pressed on, "we must stand united against this government overreach. They want to dig up our beautiful lawn, a lawn we all pay to maintain, to install an ugly industrial conduit. We must vote to deny them access. We are a community of laws. They cannot push us around." She finished her speech, flushed and panting, clearly believing she had won them over. Are there any comments before we vote? I stood up slowly. I have a comment. All eyes turned to me. I walked calmly to the front of the room, carrying a slim binder. Hello, everyone, I said, my voice even and clear. I'm Alex Petrov, the guy with the beige house. A few people chuckled. Brenda is right about one thing. Things have changed, but let's be very clear about why. I opened my binder. Brenda accuses me of breaking the rules. Let's look at the facts. One by one, I dismantled her entire case. I didn't use emotion. I used her own scripture against her. The flagpole, I said, holding up a highlighted page of the bylaws. Section 12, Appendix B. Permitted up to 25 feet. Mine is 25 feet. Compliant? The paint color, I continued, flipping the page. Approved color palette, page 47. Aggressive beige. Unfortunate name, but fully compliant. The flamingos, I held up another page. Section 8, paragraph F. Prohibits, and I quote, plaster or plastic representations of gnomes, elves, or other mythical creatures. A flamingo, last I checked, is a real bird. Annoying in large numbers, perhaps, but compliant. I went down the list, from the wind chimes to the Wi-Fi network, calmly and methodically showing how every single action I took was 100% within the letter of the law she claimed to cherish. I haven't broken a single rule, I concluded. I have only followed the rules that were weaponized against me after my property was trespassed upon and vital infrastructure was destroyed. I paused, letting that sink in. But this was never about wind chimes or flamingos. This started with this. I held up a large, glossy photo of the severed orange cable lying in my grass. This is a secure communications line for the United States Coast Guard station next door. When Brenda cut this cable, she wasn't just violating a utility easement. She was cutting off the people who pull your neighbors out of the ocean when their boats sink. And to talk a little more about that, I'd like to yield the rest of my time to a guest. On cue, Chief Warrant Officer Miller stood up. The sight of the uniform alone sent a shockwave through the room. He walked to the front, his posture ramrod straight, his expression grim. He didn't stand at the podium. He stood beside it, as if it were too flimsy for the weight of his words. "Good evening," he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "I'm Chief Warrant Officer Miller, Commander of Coast Guard Station Port Roberts. I'm not here to talk about your bylaws. I'm here to talk about public safety." He spoke for less than 3 minutes, but it was devastating. He described the search and rescue operation that was underway when Brenda cut the line. He explained, in simple, stark terms, how the 2-minute communication blackout could have meant the difference between life and death. He mentioned the federal laws regarding tampering with government equipment and interfering with a federal agency during an official operation. "The plan to install a protected conduit is not a request," he said, his voice cold as steel. "It is a matter of national security and a legal necessity to ensure that a lapse in communication, like the one caused by Miss Franklin here, never, ever happens again. Any vote or action by this association to obstruct this work will be considered interference with a federal operation, and will be met with the full force of federal law enforcement. We will begin digging on Monday." He nodded curtly. "Thank you for your time." He turned and walked back to his seat. The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a flamingo drop. The homeowners stared, slack-jawed, from the decorated military officer to the pale, trembling Brenda. Her entire world, her entire platform of petty tyranny, had just been vaporized by a man in a uniform. A man in the front row, a quiet accountant named Mr. Henderson, slowly stood up. "Madam President," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "I'd like to make a motion." "What is it, George?" Brenda whispered. "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in your leadership and for your removal as president of the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association." "Seconded!" A woman yelled from the back. Brenda stared, her mouth opening and closing silently. The vote was over in less a minute. It was nearly unanimous. Monday morning was beautiful. The sun was shining, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves, and the glorious sound of heavy machinery tearing up Brenda's sacred lawn filled the air. A massive backhoe from the Army Corps of Engineers was gouging a deep, beautiful scar across the common area green space, exactly as Chief Miller had promised. It was the most satisfying thing I had ever seen. I stood on my porch, sipping my coffee and watching the work. Brenda was nowhere to be seen. A "For Sale" sign had appeared on her lawn over the weekend. Gus and Leo pulled up in their truck. They'd been hired by 3 of my neighbors to do some work. Not malicious compliance, but actual useful home improvements. They were the new heroes of the neighborhood. "Morning, General," Gus said with a grin, handing me a donut. "Enjoying the view?" "It's like watching the sunrise, Gus," I said. "Heard Brenda's moving to Florida," Leo added. "Something about wanting to live somewhere with less government oversight." We shared a laugh. Later that day, the new interim HOA president, the accountant Mr. Henderson, approached me timidly as I was collecting my mail. "Mr. Petrov," he said, wringing his hands. "Alex, first, on behalf of the entire neighborhood, thank you. Second, and please don't take this the wrong way, now that the, war is over, would you perhaps consider relocating the flamingos?" I smiled. "I think their migration season is just about over, George." He looked so profoundly relieved I thought he might cry. The war was over. I had won. That afternoon, as a gesture of peace, I took down the flamingos. I even replaced the discordant wind chimes with a smaller, more harmonious set. The flagpole and the beige paint remained, a permanent reminder. I was in my office a few days later, my sanctuary, finally at peace. The server rack hummed its quiet song. The network was stable. My work was done. I was looking out the window at the beautiful, ugly concrete path the engineers had finished laying across the common area. It was my trophy. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Chief Miller. "Beer tonight?" My treat. I texted back, "You're on." They say good fences make good neighbors. That might be true. But I'd learned something more profound. Sometimes a high-performance satellite connection, a 25-foot flagpole, a deep understanding of your enemy's rulebook, and a friend in the federal government make for even better ones. I got my peace and quiet. It just took a little bit of malicious compliance, a sea of pink plastic, and a full-blown international incident to get there. And you know what? It was worth every single glorious, aggressively beige, flamingo-filled minute of it.